what do some of these losses look like, and how do we take that into account in the actions that we do. So, you know, in this particular model where we're differentiating between what are minor or technical breaches and might require letters of warning or things to that effect versus those issues which might have a shorter-term impact. And I think, interestingly, one of the really strong feedback issues is about how we treat amenity issues. And a lot of criticism from the community that we're not giving due weight to these particular problems, but also dealing with the contentious issues about both environmental damage but the effect on human health and where that should sit on an enforcement pyramid as well. So that's our piece of work. So, you know, we are, as I say, the context in which I see the work is it is the regulator's job to really get in there when things are not working, when those losses are occurring, to see them as being the great opportunities. But how you then discharge that role is very much needs to be very predictable and very close to criticism and scrutiny going forward, so that you can get the maximum amount of impact from that. Murray asked me to also talk briefly about the harmonisation work. That is an enormous movement for this country right across all those regulatory years. I won't go into too much detail other than to say just this. Ultimately, the harmonisation of multiple laws into one is a competition. And the competition is not about who shouts the loudest or who puts the most effort into it. The competition is which jurisdiction produces the best environment result. This battle is waged on what produces the best environmental outcomes. And don't let anybody argue on any other terms. Everyone's got different laws and different approaches. They've all got their strengths. They've all got their fans. Everybody will passionately cling to their regime. Ultimately, though, it's a competition for the environmental outcomes. That's what counts, and that's what will ultimately be the dominant player in whatever laws go by. Thanks, Murray. Good points, forcibly.
Terrific. Thanks very much, John, for your thoughts on those sort of difficult issues confronting regulators and those who are regulated. Now, I know you've given everyone a lot to think about, and just before, though, we switch to their questions, I had a few questions I was keen to ask you myself. First up, if my understanding is correct, with the Climate Change Act, the EPA will now have to consider climate change in developing environmental protection policies and in developing waste policies and in its decisions on works approvals and environmental licenses. And I was wondering if you could just give us some sort of idea of how exactly the EPA might go about doing that, and what differences licensees and others might notice, through that process.
Yeah, I think what we have given, and the Premier's given a very strong commitment, is that it's precisely that sort of issue that we want to engage and consult with businesses in, and I'm going to do my best not to try and preempt the outcome of that sort of consultation as well, particularly on that issue of works approvals and licensing, because some of the direct representations I've had, that's an area where people have got some real reservations about how that's going to be done. And I really do want to listen to some of the issues that they've raised and the context in which they're raising them. What I suppose the sort of the generic concern there is this danger of what some perceive as this danger of leadership. that if we set standards, what I was referring to in that aspirational sense, yes, we run the risk of losing our industry altogether. And that's the one where I've got a lot of listening to do and a lot of work with them to do, because we know from the EREP program that there are enormous benefits almost sitting on the shelf in terms of efficiencies and savings for businesses to grasp,
yep,
that they are not grasping. This is money for the taking out there, and without that program, businesses were simply not taking it. So we've got that conflicting pressure on the one hand, where some organisations are saying to me, don't push us into the unknown because we may well fall off the abyss.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, I'm saying this fruit is so low hanging, you'll bang your face on it, right? And you won't take it unless I walk you up to it. And so I'm trying, part of our consultation, which I'm really looking forward to, is how we can strike that line to go through that work.
Yep. Yep. Okay. And your expectation is that process is kicking off fairly shortly, in terms of what those regulations will look like.
That's right. I'm expecting some announcements. I'm expecting some announcements today about the first of the high-level consultative mechanisms, so that industry in particular can very closely sort of both participate but also monitor that process going through.
Yeah. Okay. And just on that same issue of greenhouse, the role of EPAs and environment departments in tackling greenhouse gas emissions, is it an issue where other environmental regulators around the nation have sort of shown interest in what's going to be happening as far as EPA Victoria's new powers go?
Yes, they have. I was, I think about 2 weeks ago, I was with each of my counterparts in other jurisdictions. It was probably the area of greatest discussion as to how various other jurisdictions are tackling the issue. In fact, we were just talking yesterday about some of the movement that we see coming out of the US in this area. Obviously for a range of reasons at a federal level, things are not moving that quickly. But what we've seen instead is these loose coalitions of states. Some in the east, I think, around New Jersey, some in the west, obviously around California and parts north, where we're seeing, in the absence of a broad direction, states start to produce their own cap and trade schemes and things like that. And that appears to be reflective of a number of movements around the world where neighbouring countries are moving forward. And I think that's what we'll see. It's potentially what we'll see with states here as well.
Yep. Okay, and I guess just one last question on that particular issue. Was it the view, is it the view of other regulators that they have these powers already, or do they feel that to actually sort of properly address this, they would need to go back, or that their parliaments would need to act as the Victorian Parliament did through the Climate Change Act?
Look, it does vary. I think there are 1 or 2 states who believe that interpretation or that definition could be woven within their existing statute, but there are others who believe that a more formal change will need to be made, and they're waiting on their governments to make that call.
Yeah. Okay. Just switching now, I guess, to the issue of national consistency. You were closely involved in the push for greater consistency in health and safety legislation. That was, as I think it's fair to say, a painful and long-running process. I guess ultimately successful, though there seems to have been a recent hiccup. But what were the sort of lessons, I guess, in terms of making that push effective that you took out of the OHS drive for consistency? Including its false starts, I guess.
Yeah. It was a fascinating experience, I must say, and I do appreciate your characterisation of the latest problem as being a hiccup, because that's exactly what it is. Just another bump along the road. I think it's worth just talking for a minute. Why is this harmonisation important? And I remember that because it is it is difficult. There are many times where people would say to me, well, why are you persevering with this? Because this is very painful. And I'd say because, what we want is in our case now, we want the environment improved. Yeah. In order to meet some of the challenges that we've got to meet, you need every single gram of energy that's out there going towards improving the environment. And what we find when you're forcing businesses who operate across state boundaries, that they in fact are having to waste an awful lot of energy and resource in just coping with the different jurisdictional requirements. Yep. And so that great energy and resource that could be going out